What happens when the Pentagon gets grilled over defense delays, Trump's tariffs, and the threat of ISIS? You're about to find out. In this high-tension Senate hearing, lawmakers zero in on failures in our defense industrial base, pressing officials about delays in munitions, supply chain vulnerabilities, and questionable decisions like modifying a presidential jet with taxpayer money. Watch for fiery questions on Trump-era tariffs, ISIS resurgence, and a billion-dollar jet possibly headed to his library.
So that our troops are protected. First and foremost, forward deployed. That's the question about from Ukraine to there as part of that, but also in our homeland. And that will be part of Golden Dome also, the reality of drones of different types. But it's a critical reality of the modern battlefield that we have a responsibility to address.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Senator Shaheen, followed by Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, General Kane, welcome. Thank you for being here. Both of you mentioned in your opening remarks the challenges with our defense industrial base. And General Kane, as you think about that, how do lead times for the defense industrial base affect your ability to resource worldwide operations? And are you concerned about those delays?
Well, Senator, thanks for the question. And I recall our conversation prior to my confirmation about my opportunity to run a manufacturing business earlier in my life. And, you know, the importance of decreasing lead time in order to backfill the magazine stores if we were to get into a high-end conflict anywhere in the world will be really important. And as the Secretary and I consider what does the force of the future require for the munitions, I'm always thinking about lead time and what has to be true to solve the problem of shortening that lead time and, frankly, also lowering the cost to the taxpayer while assuring the quality that we need out at the tactical edge. So it's a key portion, ma'am.
Mr. Secretary, when you were asked about the impact of President Trump's tariffs under Section 232 on the defense industrial base, you commented that you're in the business of tanks, not trade. But you can't buy tanks without trade. And the administration's steel and aluminum tariffs are having an impact on the lead times for our defense industrial base. I've visited companies in New Hampshire whose lead time has gone from weeks to years because of those steel tariffs. So how does the department address that? I asked this question of Secretary Ludnick at the Commerce hearing because he was talking about the benefit of those tariffs. But in the short term, I asked him if he had notified DOD about the tariffs because clearly it's going to have an impact on our defense industrial base. So did the Secretary raise that with you and with the Department of Defense? And how did you respond, and how are you addressing the impact on DOD and the defense base because of those tariffs?
Secretary Lutnick and I have had multiple conversations about this, and I'm grateful that he is leading the charge on rebalancing our trade relationships. And a big part of one of the things, complicating factors we face at the Defense Department is critical systems, whether they're tanks or munitions, you name it, that are reliant on supply chains elsewhere. And rebalancing that trade relationship means you're bringing industry home, you're bringing capabilities home.
I understand.
Right now we have a lot of vulnerabilities
in the long term
on that.
How the benefits accrue, but in the short term, how are you addressing that issue? Because there are short-term impacts, and how are we going to address that if we need munitions or tanks or whatever it is, and we don't have the steel and aluminum because of the tariffs?
I would first say, Senator, that somebody had to stand up and say stop on this cycle of sourcing elsewhere and relying on supply chains elsewhere and allowing for unfair trade balances. And that's what President Trump and Secretary Lutnick have done. So somebody had to do that. But at the same time, yes, we are working.
How are you dealing with the short term?
In the short term, we're working very hard on the commercial side with allies and partners, other places where we can source the materials necessary as fast as possible, commercially available, to address any shortfalls. But we're grateful for the fact that those trade relationships are being right-sized.
General Kane, Earlier in the conversation, ISIS came up and the resurgence of ISIS in Syria, given the changes there, are a real concern. How important is it that you think we maintain troops on the ground to address any potential resurgence of ISIS?
Ma'am, I don't recall the conversation being linked to any particular part of the world.
It wasn't.
Yes,
it was
ma'am.
just about ISIS, but I'm asking you because
Yes, ma'am.
Syria is the most likely place for ISIS to resurge, and we know that there are cells there that are, we've seen it in the last few weeks where they attacked.
Yes, ma'am. I'd be happy to sit with you sometime in a different setting to talk about the CT threats and my views on them at the classified level. I think I'm actually somewhat hopeful around the pressure that we have against ISIS in Syria right now, given the change of government there through a unique set of circumstances that nobody could potentially.
I agree. My concern is the withdrawal of U.S. troops would provide an opening to ISIS.
Yes, ma'am. And of course, I'll defer. That's a policy decision. They'll defer to the Secretary.
Let me just correct the record here before I close. I'm out of time, but Mr. Secretary, you pointed out that javelins were given to Ukraine during the first Trump administration, and I support that. But I would point out that he was impeached over holding up giving those javelins and equipment to Ukraine. So I think as we look at the record, we ought to try and be accurate about how we portray things. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Capito, Senator Murphy, and then Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Hegseth, and thank you, General, and thank all of the men and women every day that serve us and protect us. We're extremely grateful. Secretary Hegseth, you and your team are working on a national defense strategy. I'd be interested to know when you think you'll be coming forward with that. We know that the last year the Commission on the National Defense Strategy found that, quote, there's a high probability that the next war will be fought across multiple theaters and would involve multiple adversaries. How are you thinking about these interconnected threats, and how will your national defense strategy establish a new force to meet those challenges? And when do you think that report will come forward?
Senator, it's the right question. It drives almost all of our decision-making, certainly on a topic related to budget. We did an interim national defense strategy almost immediately upon arriving because with a new administration, our planning guidance was from the previous administration that we think had the wrong priorities or some of the wrong priorities. And by issuing that interim national defense strategy, it allowed our building to plan around the priorities of President Trump. So that was, and that interim national defense strategy focused on defending the homeland, a recognition that that is important, our pacing threat in the Indo-Pacific, and then burden sharing for our allies and partners, making sure that they're stepping up so that we can focus where we need to. I would anticipate that our national defense strategy will include a lot of those ingredients, but more fully developed. I would expect late summer.
Okay.
Is if I were to put a pin on it. But that interim strategy has driven why we're investing, where we're investing, and I think driven a lot of difficult decisions. There are things in this budget that we have to address that have been deferred for a long time, that we're willing to say that may have been a fight for the last 20 years, but it's not as applicable to the long-range fight we think we may need to be a part of in the future, or it's not survivable given what we've seen in the last 3 years in Ukraine and the way the battlefield is changing. That's what I would hope the American people would expect from their department, leaning on the military expertise of our uniform class to try to get it right.
Thank you. We'll look forward to that report, and that leads me to my second question. And I'm interested in listening to all the questions that this hasn't been asked, and this is a question on space superiority. I mean, in my view, I think a powerful destabilizing force would be if China were to get the superior hand in space. General Saltzman has said that he feels that we do not have what we need to fight on our terms. So I would imagine in your national defense strategy, but also reflected in your budget, how does this match with the need for us to become space dominant?
I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to point out that it was President Trump that created the Space Force, when a lot of people said he shouldn't in his first administration, and that's been critically important to us gaining advantages in that space, to include our ability to implement something like the Golden Dome. We also are able to leverage world-class private companies that come alongside DoD to help us with that capability. Obviously, how we rapidly field things is going to matter. And then you'll see, some of which is classified, obviously, ways in which we're investing in this budget to ensure we maintain dominance in space. That is the frontier. That is a COCOM, if you will, that we need to be able to understand fully and defend against and match our adversaries.
Well, it's interesting because I think there's a tremendous interplay between the military superiority that we could achieve in defensive capabilities in space, along with what's going to happen in the private sector. Because if we don't achieve this militarily or defensively, we're not going to be able to have the private sector superiority that we all enjoy in every facets of our life. So, last question, you mentioned, and I'm very proud of this fact, that the recruiting goals that have been, we've seen them falling short, with the exception of the Marine Corps. I want to give them a shout out because they were meeting their goals. You said that they are higher. So I assume you have some of the statistics as to how much the recruitment is up. I'm curious to know for women, if the recruitment up for women and how you see that. Do you have the statistics?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was plenty of pre-criticism that certain groups would not be interested in joining the military in this environment. And we've seen the exact opposite. Because for us, it's not about women or men or black or white. It's about we want the most qualified Americans possible in our ranks who are ready to go, and they have responded. So across the services, the Army's 4 months ahead. The Air Force is way ahead. The Navy's way ahead. And we're going to meet goals well beyond the goals that were reduced by the previous administration because they could not recruit. So we're talking about far surpassing anything that was done before.
Is there one prevailing thought when you're doing your after recruiting, talking to a recruit that's signing up? What's the difference?
The difference is a commander-in-chief they believe in, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Murphy, you're up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. I wanted to build on some of the questions that Senator Schatz was asking, just to try to build a fact predicate for some of the tough spending decisions we're going to have to make here. Just to confirm, I heard you say with respect to the gift of the plane from Qatar that we do not yet have a signed MOU with the government of Qatar. Is that right?
Correct. We're in the process of working through that.
And did you also say we don't have a signed contract with the company that is going to do the work? Or did you say that we have a contract, you're just not willing to disclose the terms?
The terms should not be disclosed of anything related to an aircraft of this type.
So in 2018, when the contract was signed with Boeing to do the upgrades or the new contracts for Air Force One, the terms of that contract were disclosed. They were made public. In fact, it was the Trump administration that issued a press release giving the total as $3.9 billion. Are you saying this time around, even after you sign the contract, you're not going to make public any of the terms of the contract?
I wasn't involved in that previous administration decision, but we're happy to take a look.
The Air Force testified before the House that that contract would likely deliver the new Air Force Ones by the 2028 timeframe. It doesn't stand to reason that you will be able to retrofit the plane from Qatar much sooner than 2028. So I'm trying to understand what the gap is that we're trying to fill. If this contract ends up being $500 million and the gap only ends up being 6 months, that doesn't sound like a wise investment for this committee to make.
Senator, I would defer to the expertise of the Air Force as far as timing of modifications and when that would happen, but there's also been delay after delay after delay on the Boeing side, so I don't know that's a firm fixed date yet, unfortunately, can be counted on.
So obviously the underlying question here is what is going to happen to the plane at the end of Trump's presidency. The president said on May 12th that this plane would be transferred to his presidential library at the end of his term. Is that your understanding of what is going to happen to this plane?
The president said that. That's my understanding, although I would look at what comes out in the MOU.
But why would we ask the American taxpayer to spend upwards of $1 billion on a plane that would then only be used for a handful of months and then transferred directly to the president? That doesn't sound like a wise use of taxpayer dollars.
A lot of the capabilities, as you know, Senator, of that particular platform are and should remain classified. So there are reasons why you might modify, even for a short period of time, an aircraft to ensure the safety and security of the President of the United States.
But when do you believe that those upgrades would be made? How long would the president have it before it got transferred to his personal possession?
That would be a determination of the Air Force that would take hold of it and make those modifications within whatever time window they believe gets it to the place where it need to be.
Yeah, I think this is extraordinary, Mr. Chairman. We're talking about a pretty massive investment of appropriations dollars into a plane that the Secretary is saying is currently planned to be transferred personally to the President. There's a lot of other pending needs that we need to fund. This would seem to be low on the list. Mr. Secretary, one final question. Obviously, you know that there is a concern in the public about a double standard that is applied.
Senators raise tough questions about military readiness, trade impacts, ISIS threats, and questionable investments in presidential aircraft. These aren't just budgetary debates. They touch the core of national defense. From space to Syria, this hearing signals shifting defense priorities amid global instability and renewed scrutiny of past presidential actions. The balance of transparency, readiness, and cost is more fragile than ever. What do you think? Should taxpayers fund $1 billion jet for a few months' use? Drop your thoughts in the comments, like if this opened your eyes, and subscribe for more breaking analysis from Capitol Hill.